Well, good evening and welcome everyone. We're grateful to see you all. We are going to begin tonight with an introduction from our language justice team.
Hola, mi nombre es Cuca Silva y junto con Steve Watts seremos sus intérpretes esta noche y este mensaje va a ser repetido en inglés. Somos miembros de la Red de Justicia Lingüística de Comunidades Justas y vamos a interpretar la reunión de hoy. Un ambiente bilingüe virtual exitoso depende de todos, no solamente de los y las intérpretes. Pueden ayudar teniendo en cuenta algunos puntos. Hablen claramente para asegurar que se les puede escuchar. Hablen a un ritmo moderado, tengan cuidado de no hablar demasiado rápido para que podamos alcanzar a interpretar todo. No queremos que se pierdan de nada. Solamente debe de hablar una persona a la vez para que no tengamos que decidir a quién interpretar. Hablen en el idioma en que se sientan más cómodos y cómodas. Pedimos que las personas bilingües no cambien de un idioma a otro debido a las limitaciones de la tecnología con la que estamos trabajando. En un momento, el anfitrión activará la función de interpretación y en la parte inferior derecha de su pantalla podrá seleccionar el idioma en el que desee escuchar la presentación o el taller. Esto le permitirá escuchar cuando los oradores hablen en ambos idiomas, pero en el idioma que sea su preferencia. Si está teniendo algún problema con su conexión, mande un mensaje por el chat al anfitrión o anfitriona para resolver el problema. Gracias. Hello, I'm Cuca Silva, and along with Steve Watts, we're going to be representing the Just Communities Language Network tonight, and we'll be providing interpretation between English and Spanish for today's meeting or today's webinar. A successful virtual bilingual environment depends on all of us, not just the interpreters. You can help by keeping a few things in mind. Speak clearly to assure we can hear you. Speak at a moderate pace. Please be careful not to speak too fast, especially if you are reading, so we can keep up. We don't want anyone to miss anything. Only one person should speak at a time, so we don't have to choose who to interpret for. Speak in whichever language you feel most comfortable. We ask that bilingual folks do not switch languages from one language to another due to the limitations of the technology that we are working with. In a moment, the host will turn on the interpretation feature, and at the bottom right part of your screen, you will be able to select the language you want to hear the presentation or the webinar in. This will allow you to hear when speakers of both languages talk, but in your language of preference. If you have any trouble with the interpretation feature, send a message to the host through the chat so that the issue can be resolved. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's great to be with you all. Before we begin tonight's program, we would like to pay our respect and acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which this event takes place, the Chumash people. We would also like to pay respect to elders both past and present, as well as other Indigenous people present. We want to welcome you tonight to What's Next for Immigration Rights Advocates. And we begin tonight with Gloria's story. Gloria and her son Alejandro are from a poor rural town in southern Mexico. She's married to a man deeply entrenched in a violent drug cartel. She lived with her husband for over a decade and was subjected to physical and mental abuse, including routine spousal rape. Contrary to many domestic violence victims in the US, Gloria was unable to obtain help from other people in her town or even the authorities. All feared her husband and the reach of the cartel. When Gloria managed to escape with her 2 children and relocate to a large city 300 miles away, her husband found her a year later. He demanded she return to him. When Gloria resisted, he kidnapped their 10-year-old daughter and threatened to come back for her and their younger son, Alejandro. Gloria is currently a client of the SB County Immigrant Legal Defense Center. Join us in listening to her story.
Lo que más me duele que yo me vine sin despedirme de nadie, de ninguno de mis hermanos ni de mi mamá. Yo no sé dónde agarré valor, pero agarré a mi hijo y me vine. Más que nada dejé a mi familia y a mi hija en México. Viajé en avión a Tijuana. En Tijuana estuve en un albergue. Tardé casi un poquito más de un mes estando en Tijuana esperando un turno que nos dieron cuando yo llegué y yo fui la número 375, eran de 10 en 10, entonces se me hizo mucho esperar, pero no me quedó de otra por mi situación. Todo ese tiempo yo estuve escondida, estuve con mucho miedo, entonces yo tardé más de un mes esperando mi turno. Yo me levantaba a las 5 de la mañana y me iba a la línea para ver cuántas personas podían meterse de este lado. Hasta que me tocó mi turno. Estuvimos todo el día en la línea, estaba yo todo el día desde las 5 de la mañana hasta las 7 de la tarde, casi ya oscuras. Y si a mí me hubieran dicho, te tienes que quedar aquí para que esperes tú tu turno, yo me hubiera quedado a dormir ahí. Cuando logré entrar, que me tocó mi turno, entramos, pero fue muy difícil también porque el trato no fue muy bueno. Gracias a Dios a mi niño no lo desapartaron de mí, pero a muchas personas desapartaron a sus hijos de ellos, de las señoras, y pues fue una situación muy difícil también porque estábamos encerrados en 4 paredes, sin ventanas, sin nada. El baño estaba en el mismo cuarto, todo muy antihigiénico, muchas cosas malas. Dormíamos en el piso, con mucho frío, prendían el aire a una temperatura muy alta. Sí sufrimos mucho también en ese lugar porque no mirábamos la luz del sol, no mirábamos nada, estábamos encerrados como animales. Cuando logré entrar, lo recuerdo muy bien, mi corazón sentí a la vez un alivio y a la vez se me partía en dos. ¿Por qué? Por todo lo que me había pasado y por haber dejado a mi hija atrás. Cuando entramos a Estados Unidos, mi primera impresión fue, no me trataron muy bien entrando porque en primera miran a los inmigrantes como criminales, como si todos hubiéramos hecho algo malo en México. Lo cual no es así. Hay muchas personas que venimos huyendo por algo muy difícil. No todos somos criminales, no todos somos delincuentes, como el mismo presidente lo dice. Y si tomamos esa decisión de venir a este país, como fue mi decisión, fue por estar bien, por tener un poco de tranquilidad. Si yo no me hubiera venido a este país, yo pienso que en este momento yo ya no existiera, ya no. El centro legal a inmigrantes me ha ayudado muchísimo, muchísimo desde que yo conocí a estas personas. Para mí fueron como mis ángeles, fue una bendición de yo haberlas conocido, porque en primera yo no tenía un abogado que me representara en mi corte, que fueron las primeras personas que me apoyaron, que me dieron la mano, que me han estado ayudando hasta ahorita, porque un abogado aquí cuesta muchísimo dinero. Mi deseo principal aquí en los Estados Unidos para mi familia es que mis niños estén bien, que mis hijos estén bien, que estén bien de salud. Yo solamente quiero estar tranquila en este país y que me dejen estar aquí con mis hijos. Y ojalá que pudiéramos tener más oportunidades las personas inmigrantes, porque sí sufrimos mucho, más que nada las mujeres sufrimos mucho porque somos como que más vulnerables a no tener oportunidades para poder salir adelante. Que yo sé que este país es muy bueno y solo les pido que nos ayuden, que nos apoyen en ese aspecto, que nos den una oportunidad para demostrar que no somos personas malas, que solamente queremos estar bien con nuestros niños aquí en este país. Nada más.
Thank you everyone for being with us. My name is Landon Rank. I'm the coordinator for the Interfaith Sanctuary Alliance of Santa Barbara. We begin with Gloria's story tonight to center our conversation on our neighbors like Gloria right here in Santa Barbara County. We're here this Love Your Neighbor weekend as people of faith and people of conscience to recommit to our sacred duty of loving our neighbors and welcoming the stranger. Last week, 13 different faith communities from different traditions shared the message of welcoming the stranger through song, word, and prayer. This week, you may have seen Love Your Neighbor posters hanging around Santa Barbara. The art on these posters was commissioned from a local immigrant artist to spread awareness about the week and share the stories of our immigrant neighbors. They're available as a digital download at loveyourneighbor.org, loveyourbneighborsb.org/poster. We also invite you to join us this Saturday for another event, and we'll share more about that later. Now, just a quick word about us. The ISA was founded in 2017 in response to anti-immigrant rhetoric being shared on a national and local level. We as people of faith and conscience are working together to ensure respect for the dignity, safety, and human rights of all people while resisting unjust policies and practices that target immigrants. We're grateful to offer this weekend in partnership with the SB County Immigrant Legal Defense Center, Immigrant Hope Santa Barbara, and Importa Santa Barbara. Our panel this evening will be moderated by Reverend Julia Hamilton. The Reverend Julia Hamilton serves as the lead minister at the Unitarian Society of Santa Barbara. She was born in Santa Barbara and moved away at a young age to New Orleans and has since lived in many places, including New York City, Boston, Jersey City, and Los Angeles. She's a graduate of Harvard Divinity School. She spent 2 years as the executive director of the Unitarian Universalist Legislative Ministry in New Jersey before heading back to California in 2011. One of her primary passions is spiritually grounded social justice work and bringing people together to build a more compassionate world. Welcome, Julia.
Thank you, Landon, and delighted to be able to moderate this timely and important discussion. And so I want to introduce you all to the friends we have here with us this evening. The Reverend Dr. Alexia Salvatierra is a Lutheran pastor with over 40 years of experience, and she serves as assistant professor of integral mission and transformational development for the School of Intercultural Studies for Fuller's Theological Seminary. She coordinates the ecumenical collaboration for asylum seekers and serves on the leadership team of Matthew 25, Mateo 25, which is a bipartisan Christian network to protect and defend families facing deportation. Alexia Salvatierra has been a national leader in the area of immigration for over 25 years, including co-founding the National Evangelical Immigration Table in 2011, the 2007 New Sanctuary Movement, the Guardian Angels Project for Unaccompanied Migrant Minors in 2014, and Matthew 25, Mateo 25 in 2016. From 2011 to 2014, she served as the Director of Justice for the Southwest California Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. From 2000 to 2011, she was the Executive Director of Clergy and Laity United for Economic Justice, beginning as the Director of CLU in Los Angeles and then as the first Director of CLU California. And it's wonderful to once again have Alexia here in Santa Barbara virtually with us this time. I'm delighted to hear from you this evening. Our other panelist this evening is our very own Frank Rodriguez. Frank serves as a policy advocate for the Central Coast Alliance United for a Sustainable Economy, cause and is the coordinator of the 805 Immigrant Coalition, a Central Coast immigrant rights organization. A Santa Barbara native who returned to Santa Barbara after receiving his master's in Latin American Studies at the University of Texas at Austin, Frank has worked as a labor, community, and electoral organizer throughout Southern California. And wonderful to have you here with us, Frank, to talk about what's going on here locally and how we can take action together to move this forward. So I thought this evening we're going to talk about both the actions we can take nationally and locally, but I wanted to start off by asking you, what compelled you to get involved in this issue? Both of you have invested considerable amount of time and heart over the years. And so I thought maybe, Frank, we'd start with you. If you want to share what compelled you to begin your work for immigration justice.
Yes, thank you, everybody. Thank you all to help organize this and for inviting us to be here today. Yeah, for me, in reflecting on this question, it really was my family's relationship here to Santa Barbara. And not only the lack of societal safety nets available to immigrant communities, but the actual proactiveness of white supremacy here where I grew up and I live, in wanting to control who has access to those safety nets. The majority of my family lived here outside of Santa Barbara proper. So we were in sheriff's territory, and those policing practices, my family felt, they just, we felt them and continue to. And they definitely stood out to me. And I think in policing, especially how they police people of color, especially men of color, has been felt in my family. And the story that politicized me is when my uncle, recent graduate at that time from San Marcos High School, was ripped of their residency and deported because the sheriff, as they continue to do, advocate for immigrants to be criminalized differently than other folks, and just that how easy it is to feel othered here in Santa Barbara, how easy it is for people to be questioned, or if they're on parole when you're riding your bicycle around town and being stopped for whatever issue it is that cops pull you over. I can count plenty of times where the cops have asked me if I'm on parole. And so for me, it's always felt kind of othered. If I felt it working alongside my pops at the country club, La Cumbre Country Club, where I worked from the summers and holidays from junior high all the way to my undergraduate over at UCLA, or helping my mom clean houses in Montecito and Hope Ranch, which they actually made me do 2 weeks ago. So this is to put it out there. My mom is still in charge, you know. But to put it out there, as parents who worked in the service economy, folks that were part of this Santa Barbara community for decades, family working in Avocado around Capitan Beach when they came over from Mexico. But soon after my uncle was deported, the majority of my family either moved back to Mexico, including my pops, uncles, aunts, cousins, my grandparents. So it was either that most of them moved to Texas or moved back to Mexico. So for me, what's really felt is that lack of really safety nets for community members, but at the same time, feeling othered and feeling, really to emphasize that statement I said in the beginning, the proactiveness of white supremacy and taking away the privileges of people like my uncle from being able to live where they spent their education at and be with the family that they grew up with and lived. So that separation of kind of families, which comes alongside gentrification, comes alongside a lot of different issues that not just rooted on policing. So we know that there's a lot of layers to this, but for me, what really sparked me was that incident in the 90s that really politicized me and got me active in really advocating for immigrant rights and making sure folks, especially here in our region, let it be working in the fields, working in the service economy, working in all the other jobs that are worked in this region, but really the othering that can happen to these communities definitely is what pushed me to really be advocating and pushing back at these stereotypes, but at the same time trying to push for a world where inclusivity, especially to health, especially to the safety nets that we all deserve, is common. And that's a struggle that is not me just telling folks. I have to go through it as well. All of us have to go through it because there's a lot of stereotypes that we just have growing up. So that's what pushes me.
Thank you, Frank. Alexia, Salvatierra, what is it that what was your first politicized moment, as Frank said? What is it that drew you to this cause?
Yeah, actually, I'm going to approach this differently than that story, because I've been sitting with it for a while, thinking about the question. And I also come from an immigrant family, a little different in that my grandparents came from Russia and Mexico. So a long time ago. I was very close to my grandma, though, both of them. And also my husband, the father of my daughter, came to this country fleeing the Civil War in Guatemala. And I have members of my extended family who have also been deported. But nobody else in my family is involved in this issue. Because I come from a family with no faith. And it's not that they don't feel about it, they feel about it. But because they have no hope, they're not a political family. There's no tradition of being a political family. They're basic, simple people, right? But they don't have any hope that things can be different. And because they don't have any hope, they just keep their heads down and do their best and live with the pain. And the reason why I'm different is because at age 16, I became a Christian. And becoming a Christian did not give me a sense of anguish about injustice. I already had that, right? But it gave me hope. Desmond Tutu says, we're resurrection people. And he winks when he says it. And I believe it. I believe that we're resurrection people. And so that sustains me. And then I was thinking that there's another level to it too, because even apart from the hope that things can get better, there is a spiritual power to even just the moment of getting involved. So, Mother Teresa had a journalist, famous atheist journalist from Britain, come to expose her. And he thought she must be a fraud. He thought she couldn't be doing what she was doing. She was taking dying people off the street and staying with them till they died. And he said, when he came and he saw what she was doing, he said, how can you do this? I couldn't last doing this. And she said, it's not social work. That every time I pick someone up off the street, I look in their eyes and it's my God. That's the promise that Jesus gave in Matthew 25, that whatever we do, we're meeting him in that moment. And there's a really beautiful scripture that I love that says, don't neglect to show hospitality to strangers because you entertain angels without knowing it. And an angel is not just, a celestial being with wings. An angel is a messenger of God sent to bring a blessing. So there is this quality when you get engaged with the fight. And I think of the fight as intelligent love. I think it's all love, right? It's just that you have to love in a way that's as effective as possible. And so, you fight. But there's a spiritual power to doing it. God is in it. If I have a sister who does her best to ignore all of this, right? But I don't think she's happy in some ways, right? I think that even though it's painful to engage, that it's beautiful to engage because God is present in the midst of it. So.
Can I follow up with a question of where you've seen hope recently? What is something that has pulled you recently? Or Frank, same to you. Is there something that has happened that has given you hope that yes, the work that we're doing is moving towards that love that is at the heart of it?
Are you first? Frank's first? Yeah, again, we'll do that.
You have something?
Yeah, no, I can take it. Yeah, I appreciate, as being mentioned, I interpret Alexia's use of intelligent love as also a critical dialogue and critical discourse on these complicated issues, not complicated, but dense historically issues such as racism, such as especially here in the Southwest, and what that means to our region, and how communities of color, and really like connecting with my family. Recently, there's been a different vocabulary, and thanks a lot to so many different groups that have been elevating not only racial justice, but just how do we have a discourse and dismantling and being able to take down these legacies of supremacy that have really detained people's, not only physically, but their imagination. So currently this critical dialogue, I think, is becoming more and more common, and I think critical dialogue is necessary in order to really tease out the nuances that's hard to, when we talk about this is how Disney movies influence the way I view the world, right? To make it simple, but I also as dense as there is a lot of rich history from my mother in terms of how they had to handle being a domestic worker for decades here in the region, and what that means as a strong woman of color to be able to advocate for themselves. So I understand that they feel the critical dialogue, that because social media is allowing for those debates that we're having out in the streets to really be to percolate throughout social media. So I appreciate that critical dialogue. Thank you to strong women of color, the Black women that have been pushing the criminal justice debate, people pushing free them all within the immigrant rights movement here statewide. I think there is a critical dialogue that is emanating, that I'm hearing talking with my parents, that I'm hearing talking with cousins who all they have is a rough relationship with the sheriff's department, but have the vocabulary in order to talk about how it's disruptive to families, how it's disruptive to how they are to just policing bodies. So this is sounding like a rant, but I think is that piece in terms of just the critical dialogue and how much that's increasing our vocabulary to talk about it, not only with parents, but those folks that are not, don't have probably that privilege, right, to be able to make this an issue. So more and more I'm seeing that, and I know that brings me hope.
So, one of my hats is that I'm the madrina, they call me, the godmother, because I've been doing this for 40 years. That's, of Matthew 25, Mateo 25. And we also are the lead agency for the ecumenical collaboration for asylum seekers. So, which, involves the Lutherans and the Presbyterians and the Methodists and the Episcopalians. So just sort of a picture. But we have a different way of working than your typical interfaith immigration organization, in that we're very intentionally balance power among immigrant congregations, non-immigrant congregations, and puentes, who Frank would be a puente, bilingual, bicultural, millennial, because we really feel like the puentes are also an equal of the third pillar. So, but we're very intentional about balancing power between those three pillars and working together. And so that even the way, we do advocacy, but we also do support circles for asylum seekers. And the way we do the circles is really intentional about accompanying, not about saving or rescuing. We're not rescuing people. We're accompanying. And we're accompanying each other, because in that process, that's where, and I'll talk about that a little bit later in a sort of a theory of change around this, but that accompaniment process and that process of building this network and doing our work together is, I'm not going to pretend that it's not messy. It's messy as all get out and often frustrating and the whole 9 yards, but you just see a lot of little miracles all the time in it. And I guess I want to just share one. I'm just going to share one. We were doing immersion experiences for people taking people into Mexico across the border during the caravans, right? And we decided to do them because we wanted to do a different kind of immersion experience. So the Puentes ran the immersion experience, and we went to Mexican churches that were responding to the migrants from Central America. So we were going not to hear the horror stories of the migrants, we were going to hear what the churches were doing. And there was a young woman from the Midwest, a Christian leader from the Midwest, white woman, who when we were going back across the border, she turned to us and she said, "You changed my life today." And we said, "Well, how do we change your life?" And she said, "You changed the hero." And the young Puente, who was our youngest Puente, she was 20 at the time, turned to her and said, "You're talking about me?" And she said, yes, I am. And she said, "I never thought of myself as a hero before." So that's really powerful, right? That's really powerful. So lots of little miracles all the time.
Amazing what we notice when we cultivate that habit of paying attention just in this work, right? Just the consistent practice of paying attention. Even as we have these big projects and big goals and initiatives that we're working on. I love the way that you framed that, which is, maybe a good time to transition into talking about some of those goals, those projects, what you see in the current landscape. So much has changed this year, and I don't need to go into all the ways things have changed this year. But we'd love to hear from you, and maybe Frank, you could begin by talking about what are some of the legislative and policy issues that you're working on right now that you'd like to bring to our attention.
Yeah, definitely. First, I'm going to start off with talking about the big lobby day we have here in California, Immigrant Lobby Day, alongside the California Immigrant Policy Center and a lot of immigrant advocates advocating for stronger, inclusive and protective policies for immigrants here in California. And so that's going to take place. So RSVP or save the day at least May 25th. Tuesday, May 25th, 2021. We're going to have our virtual day of action alongside community orgs throughout the state in order to advocate. And I want to highlight 3 hashtags to keep it simple. The first one is health for all. Health for all alongside just making sure we have health access for all community members throughout the United States. But here in California, there's been a push to make sure our undocumented community member has access to healthcare and those safety nets that are available through our healthcare system. At the moment, there's access to Medi-Cal for undocumented immigrants up to 26 years old, DACA recipients, and then at the moment trying to really solidify the health for all adults. Sorry about that, for all elders, and that hasn't been cleared up yet. That push is still happening, but what we were trying to get to with that health for all is healthcare coverage for all undocumented immigrants, because at the end of the day, as these times are showing, we all need to be healthy for our community to be healthy. Alongside that, the next effort really being pushed statewide is safety net for all. As we experienced before COVID-19, disasters create emergency situations that unless folks have those proper safety nets, unless folks are able to have in the bank really past month's rent or being able to make sure they have a roof over their head, folks can be displaced here from our communities with the lack of those safety nets. So that's why a lot of community orgs like ours got together with MECOP, FLA cause in order to put the 805 on DocuFund in order to give access to folks that didn't have access to federal funds, FEMA funds in response to the Thomas fires, the stimulus checks in response to COVID-19. So the state has taken action. They're through an ITIN number. Undocumented folks are going to be able to access stimulus money in order to respond to COVID-19 and to get tax returns for Cali ITC, Earned Income Tax Credit, and YCTC, Young Children Tax Credit. So we're excited for this opportunity for undocumented community members to have access to those safety nets. Let it be Medi-Cal, let it be monetary assistance. That would be considered a public charge. However, because this is in response to COVID-19 and because the state is making these tax changes in terms of returns that has the ability for undocumented folks to have access. So we want more. We're going to continue advocating for more, particularly in terms of this safety net for all, is that these one-time supports aren't enough. We're talking about access for folks such as unemployment. How do folks who are undocumented have that support when they face this emergency so they're not out in the streets? And the last one is ICE out of California. As folks know, the entanglement between federal and local law enforcement, as I try to kind of illustrate in my story, is it separates our families. It allows for these vehicles of white supremacy that are law enforcement, especially our sheriff's department. And I bring that up as someone growing up growing up in the East Side, and then also in Santa Barbara, and also growing up outside of Santa Barbara, dealing with the sheriffs have always been unique and felt. And so I elevate that to say that this entanglement, this proactiveness of local law enforcement wanting to work with our federal law enforcement, wanting to have humans who have families be separated from their families, is unjust. So the big legislative push following the ICE out of California lineage. First, there was the Trust Act, the Truth Act, and the California Values Act. The next one being proposed is the Vision Act, to really take on the successes we've had within our local county jails and bring that to the prisons, and make sure that folks who are housed within prisons have the same protections and aren't criminalized and othered through our legal system. So a lot more on there, but really putting those hashtags. All of these spaces have broader coalitions, so please investigate them, get involved. And again, that's Health for All, Safety Net for All, and ICE out of California. Those are the three I wanted to highlight. There's of course many more, and we can share those, but wanted to highlight those three because today I'm really feeling those safety nets that we're trying to get for our community, and that's just in the back of my mind of how my family has related to these safety nets, but at the same time our law enforcement, and how we want to make sure that folks are loved and we're loving our neighbors. So yeah, I'll keep it there.
Thank you. And I think that term safety net, highlights that longing for peace and safety that is a universal human need, and the stress that not having a sense of basic safety and security, the health impacts, the psychological and emotional impacts, the mental health impacts are so profound. I'm thinking of Gloria's story, who we heard at the beginning of this evening, just articulating that fundamental desire for peace and safety. So when you think of the term safety net, it has kind of these wonky policy implications, but at its base, what you're talking about is that longing for peace and safety and security that is universal among humans. So thank you. And of course, what happens here locally and statewide also is connected to what's happening at a larger national level. So I would love it if you could share with us some of the things that you're seeing at the national level, Alexia.
Yes, I'm always amazed when I think about California, because in so many ways, California is so far beyond the nation. But it was funny, Julie, when you asked about what gives me hope. I mean, definitely there's good stuff happening, right, on a federal level. And I don't think of that as hope in some ways. I think of that as relief. There's some definite relief. There are some horrible things that have stopped or are stopping, and I want to talk about that. But in terms of getting where we want to go, I think people don't realize that we're on a very long, slow road, and we might not get there. So, or might get to there in some simple ways, but not in all the ways that we want, or anywhere near all the ways we want. So, I think most of us who are long-term activists are excited, but our excitement is tempered. So let me just share where we are on all of this. And oh, it's not doing what I want. It doesn't do what I want. Oh, well, we're gonna have to do it like this because I can't get in there to make it a slideshow.
We'll roll with it.
I will roll with it. Okay. So what I just want to talk about first is that under the Trump administration, there were over 448 changes in policy, and they were all restrictive. And some of them were downright vicious. So, the Biden administration has been going a variety in there and changing those. So there was a policy that made asylum seekers remain in Mexico during their processing of their cases. That's ended. He's lifted the refugee caps for this year from 15,000 to 62,000 and saying for next year it'll be 125,000. He's revoked the Muslim ban. He's dismissed the suit against sanctuary cities. They're allowing alternatives to detention at the border. Instead of detaining people, they're letting them leave with ankle bracelets, which is huge because the Trump administration was putting people in detention and throwing away the key, right? And under COVID, that was a death sentence for people. And, you know, we won some of that. We won some of it in a lawsuit. We won some of it in advocacy, but it's just a huge difference to have an administration whose policy is on alternative to detention, who doesn't do it all right, but whose main thrust is to do it right. Then 3 days ago, they dropped the public charge regulation. That's huge. That means that, you know, there's always a calculus around people's to what extent they might be dependent on public programs, but that calculus has traditionally ignored the basics like healthcare and food, right? And Trump was including healthcare and food in that calculus. And so as of 3 days ago, that doesn't exist. Changing processing of refugees. Immediately, he started moving in the direction of dreamer protection, but that's in court right now. So if there's no DREAM Act, dreamers are still in danger because it's in a Texas court. Because when he tried to change that, he got sued. So our administration is being sued right now around dreamers. And so dreamers are not safe and people need to know that. There is on a statewide level, you know, we're going farther around the stimulus checks, but even nationally, there is stimulus now for mixed status families, and mixed status families were intentionally excluded from the CARES Act. So that meant that even if you were a citizen, if your spouse wasn't, you were excluded. So that has changed. There are task forces that are working on the reform, as much reform as is possible on a regulatory level, right? So he's got task forces of all kinds working on that. There's still pandemic restrictions at the border, and because we have a lot more unaccompanied migrant children coming right now, a little over like 340 a day. They don't want to put them in those old detention centers that were the cages for children, but they're not quite sure what to do with them because they can't process them quickly enough yet. They're going to bring more processing resources to the border, but they just can't keep up right now. But they will. They'll get it in order. They'll get it back to, under the Obama administration, they processed about 300 people a day. Processing means that you come in to the country and then they figure out what they're going to do with you. Under Trump, they processed 20 people a day. So they created the backlog that Gloria is talking about very intentionally. They didn't have to do that. They could have processed people. And so that's just a little picture of what's been done so far. But you can see that you can't do everything with regulation. You can undo some of the worst that's been done, but you really have to have legislation. So the Biden administration proposed a mega piece, an immigration reform piece of legislation called the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021, but it's completely a Democrat-supported act. I want you to hear this, because a big philosophic difference that you will have to decide where you fall on is some people are saying we are only pushing for this because it is comprehensive and it's what we want. And there are other people who are willing to do a piecemeal approach because it's much more likely to pass. So you sort of have to decide where you want to stand with that. And then, of course, some people are pushing for a principle, which is actually even more what we want, but it's just a principle. It's not even a bill. So I'll clarify all three of those so that people can decide what they want to work on. But the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021 will not pass unless you can get 10 Republican senators to sign on to it. But right now, it only has a Democratic senator and a Democratic congressperson who sponsored it. They're both Democrats. So you can just see right there that we don't have any Republican support for this. It would give immediately temporary legal permission to most undocumented people in this country with an 8-year path to citizenship. It would give immediate green cards to dreamers, people who have TPS, and farm workers. And the three-way lines you can stand in. When people talk about standing in line for immigration, we call the three lines blood, sweat, and tears. Blood is family relationship, sweat is employment, and tears are refugees or people seeking asylum. And so they're working actually on the reform, and this bill would work on the reform of all three systems. So just for example, something that has really caused enormous anguish in families is something called the 10-year ban, which is if you've been here more than a year undocumented, and that can be proven, you have to go back to your home country for 10 years before you can apply, even if you have a qualifying family case. So you have a spouse, for example, who's a US citizen, you still have to go back. And that was really directly hitting dreamers, right? So the 10-year ban would be gone. They would end the backlogs. People could join their families while they were waiting for their immigration papers to come through. You know, just all these little ways, little evidences of kindness instead of viciousness over and over again. And I'm only giving you taste because this is a complicated, long piece of legislation. You can look it up. It's publicly accessible, but just to give you a taste. The SWET system, there would be no country caps. Our visas would be tied to our actual needs for labor. Right now, we only have 5,000 visas per year since 1995 for all unskilled labor, including all farm labor. So anybody who works in a farm economy knows that that's insane. So we wouldn't have these flat caps at all. We would reform the tier system, so there'd be faster processing at the border, a more open asylum system. And we would address the roots of the problem with funding in Central America, that's one of the places in the world. There are other places people are fleeing, but that's a big one. And we created a lot of the problem there. So we would be investing in helping to solve it, which they started to do under Obama, and it had a big impact. So it's real. Then they're talking about worker protections. They're not taking away enforcement, but they're talking about focusing enforcement on serious crime, on guns, drugs, and human trafficking. But I think something that just characterizes, helps us to understand this whole bill is that all the language that used to refer to immigrants as aliens is taken out, and it all talks about them as non-citizens. So it's just a different approach to immigration. And people like Angelica Salas, who runs CHIRLA, was on the committee working on this. So it really came from advocates in the field that were really trying to say, what would it mean to change our system in a way that we think we could get broad agreement on? So piecemeal approach, because we don't have any Republicans. So even though there are Republicans who I think in their heart of hearts would agree, but we don't have any because of the current situation in DC. So there are several things that are happening. There are 3 things that are happening are bipartisan, which means they have a very good chance of passing. One of them is the DREAM Act of 2021, which was introduced on February 5th, but last Wednesday, the 100 biggest companies in the US said they supported it. So that's a big push. Again, it doesn't mean that it will pass. It still needs help, but it has a good chance. Then the Farm Workforce Modernization Act, which would pay attention to farm workers and all that they contribute. And that's bipartisan. And then something called the Binational Health Strategies Act, which really looks at, okay, let's take COVID seriously, but let's not use COVID as an excuse for not letting people into the country. So how do we manage that, right? So all 3 of those are bipartisan. They all need support. Piecemeal legislation will not pass without advocacy. But I just want to say that again. Even piecemeal legislation will not pass without advocacy. But some people don't want to do piecemeal legislation at all. So that's a philosophic decision, right? There's something that's in between what I would call piecemeal and idealistic, and that's the American Dream and Promise Act of 2021 by Roybal, which was just introduced, it doesn't have any Republican support, but it's not impossible that it could get Republican support. It focuses on the Dreamers, TPS, and people who've had deferred deportation, and it was basically taken away during Trump, but they had it before that. And that's people who are fighting their case, and they're allowed to stay in the country while they're fighting their case. So that's basic. I want to say something about the unique role when I talk about advocacy, the unique role of faith communities. You know, when some of these bills, I would say a number of the provisions in the Citizenship Act, when they just run those provisions by people without any partisan connection, and this happened in 2007 and 2013, huge surveys, you get about 75% agreement on most of it. People your average American wants a system that is effective, logical, sane, and humane. Most people do. You run the provisions by them and they go, sure, right? But we can't pass them. We can't even pass the DREAM Act because non-immigrants lack passion. They'll look at it and they'll say, that sounds good, but it's not about them. And so they don't call their legislators. I know some of you out there do, but very few people do. And then immigrants don't call, like, members of my family because they don't have any hope. But when immigrants and non-immigrants get together as family, which is what happens in faith communities, then there's an exchange of passion and hope. And that's what fuels the kind of sustained advocacy we need to change the situation. But that's really a unique role of faith communities who have as our mandate that we care about people that are not us with great passion. At least that's what we're called to do. The only way, by the way, to build, and I know this is hard in a place like Santa Barbara because there's a lot of, quiet separation from my perspective. But in Los Angeles, that's part of why we're working so hard on it, is that to create that exchange of passion and hope, you actually need to share life together in a deeper way than charity. So relationships of joint mission where people are working together on something they believe in deeply and care about, which usually has to happen on a very practical level. You can do it visiting detention centers together. You can do it, right? There's a lot of ways that you can do it together that build that kind of relationship. And you really have to include the other, right? The people that you are not used to spending time with, right? You have to build that coalition with great intentionality, which is what we're working on in LA. I know it's harder in Santa Barbara. It will take more work, but I would really suggest that Spanish-speaking congregations and English-speaking congregations can get together and work together on relationships of joint mission. So I have a what to do that is much more general. So I'm just going to share it before you go into your specifics, which is that, you're not going to do this on your own, even clicking on the internet and have any real impact. You need to join a coalition. And you've been hearing from Frank about local coalitions. There are also national coalitions. So the Interfaith Immigration Coalition is really solid. Sojourners does really good work. Some of you may know Sojourners. There is the Citizenship for All movement. It's very idealistic. Let me just say that. And I say that without judgment. It just that the goal of Citizenship for All is that every single person who's here undocumented has a legalized pathway to citizenship and that we end all detention and deportation. It's a lovely vision. It's what we would want in our hearts. And some people really want to work on that and not work on the bills. So it is a strategy. So I need to lay that out there for you all. And you can tell it's not my strategy, but I like winning because I am so aware of the real life consequences of not winning. Anyhow, by the way, advocacy is best and most effective when it's about relationship. That means you can build, and just hear my little pitch, you could build a real relationship with the office of your representatives. The staff, there are staff in that office that want to see you. And if you get enough power going, your representative will see you. But you need them not just to see you at the moment when they have to make a decision. You need a relationship because that relationship has great power to move people over time. So build a relationship. They're serving you. Go see them, get to know them. And some of them are people of faith, and you can end up having that kind of conversation, and that can be really powerful. So do support asylum seekers. We're going to have a lot of asylum seekers coming to this country, and they're going to need a lot of help because some of them have family networks here, but a lot of them don't. So they're going to need to, and walking together and supporting asylum seekers is a way to build intimacy and joint mission. And then educating yourself and others. And Migration Policy Institute has great information. So does National Immigration Forum, slightly different takes on it. Then some books that I would recommend for people of faith: Welcoming the Stranger by Matt Sorens and Jenny Yang, Our God is Undocumented by Chen Myers and Matthew Caldwell, and The God Who Sees by Karen Gonzalez are all really good texts for you to read and for people in your church, like if you want to do, or your church or your synagogue, your congregation, that if people want to do a book study, these are all really good books to help people get rooted in the issue. So that's all.
Thank you. And I appreciate you presenting these different options for strategies, because some people just love the policy, dig in to the details and work out strategy. And for some people, the relational is what feeds and nurtures, and the visionary piece might do it for some people, get them into the work. So I appreciate you pointing out that there's multiple strategies on this issue. And our job is to not throw our hands up and back away because there's so many options, but rather follow the place where you can get in there and do the work. And it might be different from, you might make a different choice than someone else, but I appreciate you presenting so many different ways. Nobody has an excuse not to get involved at this point.
That's right. Wherever you are on the political spectrum, you have a place.
Yeah. So before we move on to the slide of some other action items, and then move into a Q&A, I just want to ask Frank if you have anything that you would like to add to that relational piece. We talked kind of about the policy pieces, but then Alexia, you also talked about the building relationships and the importance of sort of understanding how people are feeling about how things are right now in our community. And so I just wanted to ask if you had anything you wanted to add about that before we move on.
Frank just messaged me and said that his internet just went out, so he'll be momentarily.
Okay. Well, we'll hold on to that. We'll move on to the action item slides, and maybe we can come back around to that with Frank when he gets back on. So, so Landon, do you have a couple of slides here to share with us?
I do.
Wonderful. And then we're gonna, start thinking if you have questions for Alexia and hopefully for Frank if he's able to join us. We're gonna put those into the chat in just a minute. But for now, I want to go through some of the action items. And of course, all of this is going to be available after this. So if you're not catching it right now, you can follow up with Love Your Neighbor SB. We'll have all of this available. So upcoming, there is a meeting at the end of this month for ICE out of Santa Barbara County Working Group on the 29th. If you'd like to get involved in that effort, it's at 4 o'clock. There's the hashtags that Frank mentioned that'll get you connected into kind of the informational stream, the social media stream on some of these issues. We are partners. Love Your Neighbor SB has a lot of wonderful local partners. And on Saturday, we are going to be having our movie night and panel discussion with Importa and Immigrant Hope and the Immigration Legal Defense Center, which will also have opportunities for volunteering and getting involved here locally in Santa Barbara County. So there's both kind of the policy and the relational piece, and then also the need for volunteers to just help out all of these groups that are doing this work. And I'm sure there's a place for you there. And you can always join the Interfaith Sanctuary Alliance's mailing list to keep up to date on issues as they come through. And I don't know if you noticed some of those dates on the legislation. We're talking, these all just came out at the beginning of this month. I mean, this is hot off the presses, and this advocacy work is going to be moving forward and evolving right now. So this is a really good time to kind of get up to speed on how things have changed with the new administration to figure out how you can get involved in the advocacy work on these issues going forward. And then each of us can make a personal commitment to this conversation, to sharing what we've discussed here with one other person when we leave this space, to keep the conversation going in our family, in our communities, taking a risk on building some relationships with people who maybe you've never sat down with. And in this time and space, a lot of this happens online and on Zoom, but that won't be forever. And so one of the things that we can do is commit to what the next place we're going to have this conversation is in our lives and in our spheres, in our congregations, with our families. Am I missing anything, Landon?
I think Frank will probably touch more on the ICE out of Santa Barbara County Working Group, but as Julie said, it's the work of holding our sheriff's department accountable. In the state of California, most interactions between the sheriff's department and ICE are illegal. And so, oh, there he is now.
Okay.
Hey, Frank, welcome back. I was just starting to share about ICE out of Santa Barbara County. Maybe I can tag it over to you and you can just share a little bit about what that group will be working on.
Yeah. So the ICE out of California coalition statewide has been advocating for just that. How do we work in a society where we don't have federal law enforcement, where individuals that are tasked with taking human bodies and taking them outside of our country, and what is that deportation? So there's ways we can really advocate for that locally. One is really just enforcing the laws we already have in place here in California. The latest being the California Values Act, which limits the individuals which federal law enforcement, ICE, can reach when entering our county jails in Ventura and Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo counties. And so we need to make sure when we know they are violating the rights of immigrants. And just to put it out there, as Alexia has been describing, there are different mentalities of how to approach this work. And knowing that these these laws and policies that are in practice were compromises. Because there are a lot of rhetoric, a lot of points in here in which criminalizes folks and how different folks are treated, particularly in what crime they've been given. So I think there's one piece in which we're using the laws that we have in place to limit federal law enforcement and just to continue to advocate it in this venue that we do have, which is our county supervisors. And so with our county supervisors is where we advocate for them to, with the Truth Act forums, which is a forum in order to have transparency on how federal law enforcement works locally. That is the venue for us to really elevate that. But we want to go beyond, and we really want to make sure that when we know that our county and our sheriffs are violating these laws, when they're taking advantage, and when I kind of started my statement in saying there is proactiveness of white supremacy to take folks and treat them differently within our criminal justice system than someone who is a citizen or someone who is white. And so I think the point of the ICE out of Santa Barbara coalition, one, to be part of the ICE out of California coalition, and two, to take that same advocacy, those same tactics, those same issues that have been working from San Diego up into past the Bay Area. I know California is larger than that. I always forget the cities, but the point being, we want to make sure that we integrate the coalitions we've been a part of in pushing back against ICE in our communities, and really be proactive of that locally. A lot of policy wonk stuff, but at the same time, it's at the end of the day, we're supporting families. And at the end of the day, really being fully idealistic in terms of, we know there's a different society than what's been given. We know there's a different society than what's talked about, and we know there's another vocabulary and another language to bring us all together. So step by step we get there. But the ICE out of California coalition is Santa Barbara County is new. So at the same time, Landon, really to emphasize, we're really trying to find what is all the tangibles and what is it all that can come from this coalition.
Yeah, the systems we have were created by human beings, and we can create different systems if we can imagine them, right? And so that work, that collective imagination, that liberation of our imagination to figure out how we can be together in different ways is critical, locally as well as nationally. And the love your neighbor concept, remembering that people who are incarcerated are our neighbors too, and people with records are our neighbors, and people in detention centers are our neighbors. And so when we talk about love your neighbor from this perspective of this weekend, and from our faith-based organizing perspective, that is an expansive term that includes all human beings who are in relationship with us. So encouraging everybody to keep expanding that concept of who your neighbor is and what it means to bring love into that relationship. So now is the time to open up the chat for questions. We've covered a lot of material, from the personal to the political, relational, organizing strategies. So if you have questions for either of our panelists, go ahead and type that into the chat. And we have a few minutes to talk a little further. So, and if you have a general question, you can just type it in. If it's a question that you'd like to direct to either Alexia or Frank, you can always type in, the name of the person who, if there's something you'd like to follow up with or ask for more information about, or pick up on one of the threads from the conversation that we've started. I think you can go ahead and type it into the chat. And again, while you're typing your brilliant questions that are coming this way, all of this will be available. We've thrown up a lot of links. If you want to save the chat, I know when I leave Zoom meetings, I always am like, oh, what was the name of that book? Or, oh gosh, I didn't click through to that website because I was engaged in the program. There's a little button on the corner of the chat on mine where I can pull it up and I can hit save chat and it'll save it to my computer or device. So if you want to capture all of these amazing resources, don't forget to hit save chat, and then you'll have access to it even after the meeting's over. So I have a question from Carolyn asking Alexia, what are some organizations doing good work at the southern border to help migrants and help reunify families? Are there particular organizations on the border that you would recommend checking out?
So there's a bunch of them, but my favorite is Al Otro Lado, because they're the only organization of lawyers who can work on both sides of the border, right? That they work in coalition with Mexican lawyers and with US lawyers, and they actually, and they're fierce. I've known them for a long time. They're fierce and they're effective. So they did some of the major work around pushing the government to let the families back in and reunite them.
Can you say the name of the organization?
Advocacy level and a legal level. Al Otro Lado, 3 words. Yeah, but there's a number of good organizations working on the border in different ways. But if if you're looking for one that you would support, that's who I would say. And they're going to have a lot more work to do coming up, and they're going to need the support. A lot of their lawyers are volunteers.
And I see that Landon just was quick there to put in a link so you can click through and find out more about that organization.
Yeah.
A question coming from Lawrence, wondering if the Santa Barbara County Sheriff's cooperation with ICE, is it considered illegal in this county? And is there legislation to that effect elsewhere, right? Are there other places that have this legislation that tries to keep these separate?
Yeah, I can, at the moment, we can definitely say that it's limited what we know about the relationship between our Santa Barbara County Sheriff's Department and the relationship with Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And I say that to say we do have the Truth Act, which calls for transparency and accountability, which that accountability is a one-time supervisor agendized meeting called the Truth Act Forum, in which the sheriff gives a presentation, which could be 5 minutes, on what their relationship looks like. And these have come usually in November, December, the last few years. So towards the end of the year, we're getting numbers. For instance, for this past year, 2020, we got the numbers for 2019. So kind of just really emphasizing it was out of date data. We don't know all the inner workings. And just to give an example, when someone's getting processed, let it be in Oxnard or here in Santa Barbara, there is kind of these procedures, right? In terms of how an individual is given their rights, let them know about the Truth Act, letting them know they have the right to not have to be interviewed by an ICE agent, for instance, if they have a misdemeanor. These same protections aren't afforded to folks who have a felony. So I think there is, from the presentation that they give to the county supervisors, they say that they're following all legal channels and aren't doing anything illegal. But we've definitely heard from community members, and of course, I'll keep it like that. Don't want to get into specifics in terms of them violating that. So I think as my presentation has probably sounded today, there's a little trust in them for the reason that they are proactive in that. And the laws that guide this are, like I said, the Trust Act, the Truth Act, and the California Values Act, and different sheriff's departments, because most sheriffs are elected here in the state, or all sheriffs are elected here in California, and that's a different relationship than a lot of our police chiefs who are appointed by an elected legislative body. So our county board of supervisors, at the end of the day, have the ability to push the workings of the sheriff's department only off the budget. And really with our society and where we're at, there's many times push on how we push back on law enforcement. That of course has been changing as of late. Thank you to all the beautiful organizing happening right now, and of course engaging in that critical debate. But there are different counties that do not allow ICE at all to pick up individuals in their county. So we know of other counties, Los Angeles being the latest, that basically say you cannot transfer someone from our jail to federal law enforcement. So we know that reality doesn't have to be the way it is here. There are sheriffs who have taken that decision to separate that relationship with federal law enforcement, because at the end of the day, we don't want a system that can separate and rip families apart. So I would say they say that it's not illegal, but we do have other counties that have shown that we don't have to be collaborating with ICE, and we don't have to criminalize immigrants differently and other these communities.
I'm hearing a little bit about the difference between the letter of the law and the spirit of the law. And, you know, the spirit of the law was to separate out deportation, federal immigration enforcement, and local law enforcement issues for a whole lot of reasons that we don't need to go over, but that there is, in the Truth Act forums, there's sort of been the letter of the law, the checking off the boxes, but maybe there needs to be, what I'm hearing you say, there needs to be continued advocacy and oversight to make sure that it's the spirit of the law about the kind of community we want to see and what's the sheriff's role in that, rather than just the presentation that ticks off, is this illegal or not, is some of what I'm hearing you say.
Definitely. And I would also say it's, there's different storylines. One, to emphasize that most of our policing is guided and is a vision from what was the response to 9/11 and the Patriot Act, and really the stop of immigration reform conversations back then, to this further criminalizing terrorist kind of language, and that's only to emphasize that the technology that came alongside the Patriot Act, that as folks probably know here, became built during the Bush administration, but really put into practice in its full during the Obama presidency. And then when Trump got this, really continued to push the technology, and when I mean technology, should really emphasize the interconnectedness of the technology between local law enforcement and federal law enforcement, and this idea that local police who are dealing with this local issue, trying to help solve, and really hopefully we would want a better and just situation than what situation is being addressed, to one in which we entangle this idea that, oh, this human is an immigrant, oh, we need to make sure that they're not here in our communities because this quote unquote criminal is different from a citizen or a white criminal, quote unquote, of course. And we're going to treat this individual differently because we can go an extra step and make sure this human is not in our community, which we can't do with someone who is a citizen, and we can't take that proactiveness of, really at the end of the day, for me, it's the opposite of love when you want to rip someone from the community and not have to deal with them anymore. That's not love. That is in another spectrum. So for us to call that out at the heart of what that is, should be available, and really linking how all these changes happened. And I like to elevate that piece because before 9/11 we had a different reality. We still had not ICE, right? It was and before Homeland Security. Thank you.
Some of us are old.
So yeah, just to emphasize it, when our sheriffs kind of tell us these things, we're like, yo, that wasn't the reality. Yeah. Decades ago.
Yeah. ICE did not always exist. It was a system that was created and built just like, you know, and has changed over time. So I know there's a Q&A window. So Landon, you are able to read off some of the questions that have been popping into the Q&A window. So I don't know if you want to read one off for us.
Yeah, totally. So there was a clarification question, someone wondering about which policies are at the California state level, policies that have been discussed tonight. Yeah.
Everything Frank said.
Yeah, everything I said was focusing on the state level. And just to keep it simple, the Immigrant Lobby Day, when we go to the state, well, virtually now, we're going to the state capitol. We're going to be advocating for bills that are going to be part of this package of the priority bills. So if you go to caimmigrant.org, CIPC's website, there, one, you can see Immigrant Lobby Day, and two, you can find the legislative priorities in advocating here in the state. And some of those are like the ones I mentioned: health for all, safety net for all, eyesight of California. But some other ones are the One California grant, which is a grant here in California, where some of the budget in California is allocated to the great organizations that are now going to be part of this Love Your Neighbor Weekend, such as Importa, such as Immigrant Hope, such as different service providers for the immigrant community, because California believes in having an infrastructure and building those safety nets to make sure people have the resources to be able to use those safety nets, because we know it's not always easy. So yeah, I would refer people to caimmigrant.org.
I wanted to mention also that there's federal funding in that Citizenship Act for that kind of work as well.
Excellent. This is a chance to follow through on that recommendation that Alexia made to build relationships with your representatives, right? So the Immigrant Lobby Day is an opportunity to join in and get to know, show up in their office virtually. And you don't even have to get on the overnight bus to Sacramento this year. So this is a great opportunity to join in Immigrant Lobby Day if you haven't been able to. Not that the bus ride to Sacramento is not lots of fun, but you don't have to leave at midnight. So is there another question, Landon, you want to add?
It's a good big picture question. There exists a prejudice against helping immigrants by non-immigrants. How do we generate conversations with people who've decided that helping immigrant people is not beneficial to American citizens, or that immigrants are not our neighbors?
So I can start off on that one just because I spend a lot of time doing that. So let me say that that some of the reaction to immigrants is fed by misinformation, but at its root, it's a biological reaction. It's the growling that a dog does when somebody comes up to the bowl, right? If you have two dogs and one of them is eating, what happens when the other dog comes up, right? It's not an intellectual reaction. It's a biological reaction. And if you don't understand that, what happens is you throw facts at people who are having a biological reaction. It does nothing, right? When someone is experiencing the other as a threat, it doesn't help to throw facts at them. It just makes them angry at you. It doesn't help. It doesn't change their mind. It doesn't change their heart. What you have to do is move from a place of fear to a place of love. That's what shifts people out of that biological state. We're not destined to be trapped in that biological state. We can go beyond that. So that's why I say you need a relationship. Not in every case. There are people who are constantly looking for the truth by nature. They are beautiful. They are in the minority. Let me be a cynical old woman. But let me also not be so cynical, because when you build relationships, then people's paradigms break, and then they are more interested in finding out information. You know, when they care about somebody who is different, then they're begin to be interested. So you have to build those relationships, and often it takes bridge people to do it. You know, and again, let me just say that relationships of charity won't do it, because you have to trust the other person. It's not just a fact to love them enough to change your mind. You have to trust them. And in charity, you don't necessarily trust the person you're helping. So you really need to build relationships working with people and not for them in order to get to that point. But I know, and people hear that and they're like, that's just too much work. But that's how it works. If you actually want to transform the positions of people that are anti-immigrant, that's what it takes. And then, of course, you need to have all your information. I mean, once people are open, I had one of my students recently who was adamantly anti-immigrant, one of my Fuller students, and very high leader in the Republican Party. And then she had some experiences that changed her. And so, you know, she was really looking when I met her for new information. And so, you know, then she had a number of realizations with different kinds of information that we gave her, mostly about the history. Like Frank was saying earlier, most people don't know the history. They think the way things are is the way they've always been. But you don't even want to know the history until you care. That might sound like a hard word, but that's my experience. But once you care, then you want to know the history. Then you want to know the whole picture. And that's when it's good for those of us who want to advocate to know the whole picture.
So I'm hearing kind of a both and, that you don't necessarily begin with the facts, but you have to have the facts so that when a person is ready and open to learn more, then you can move some resources their way, right? But that maybe beginning with, let me give you a reading list, isn't necessarily going to break through.
Yeah. And, you know, some people are much more moved by scripture. So it's not just facts, but some people, you know, who are really serious about their faith are very moved by scripture, but not usually until they get out of that dog at the bowl biological reaction. And I don't know how I can say it strongly enough, but all of us have that biological reaction. It's not like some of us are, you know, animals. That's not what I'm saying. All of us are animals. All of us have that biological reaction to the other. It's just what enables you to go beyond that. Right?
Landon, were there any other questions on the Q&A? I can't see the Q&A window, so I'm relying on you to, well, I think maybe we can take one more.
Let me just say one other thing about this is that the other can be a threat or the other can be a contributor. The other can be a blessing. And I think we all know that in our rational minds, is that somebody who's different from you, who's coming to the bowl and maybe bringing more food, but you know that in some part of you. And so there's some part of you that's open to learn about that. But it depends on the size of the part.
Two quick things. One question we've just gotten several times, Alexia, is whether we can share your PowerPoint slides after this.
Sure, of course.
So we'll email those out to all attendees. But the other question, kind of in a similar vein to Alexia, is how do we initiate the advocacy directed towards the Republicans that are needed to pass the bipartisan legislature?
So there are groups working nationally that you can, I remember I was talking about how you need to be part of a coalition. So the Evangelical Immigration Table, and you don't have to be an evangelical to work with them. There's Business Bibles and Badges is another very large coalition. It's part of the National Immigration Forum. And so these are coalitions that are working on reaching Republicans. And again, if you work in coalition, then what you're doing is coordinated. But definitely if Republicans, even moderate Dems, because the way that all organizing works is like pool balls. If anybody's played pool, you know, you don't shoot every ball into the hole independently, right? The ball goes into the other ball, goes into the other ball, goes into the hole. Is that there are people who are Democrats who are much closer to the Republicans than others. There are people that you know probably within your circles and networks that may be Republican or may be much closer to Republicans than others. So sometimes, you know, you're moving somebody else who's then going to move somebody else. You're joining a coalition, you're adding your support, you're connecting your people to that coalition, right? So that you're adding all the pieces together. I understand that you do have some people within your larger territory, right, that are either moderate Dems or Republicans.
It sounds like this is another place where those relationships with our elected representatives can be helpful in pointing towards where useful efforts might be on the national level and where some of these coalitions might exist.
You know, a lot of people in the business community straddle the line, and you may know people in the business community, and those are good bridges.
Well, with that fantastic pool metaphor, longing for the days when we can return to the pool table or the other social gathering spaces where we can talk about this all night long and come up with grand strategies and build those relationships that will carry this work forward in the years to come, holding out hope that we'll be able to do that sometime soon again. I want to thank you both, Alexia and Frank, for spending some time with us this evening to help us understand more about what's happening right now in this constantly changing work that we are doing. And thank you all of you who have joined us for this evening, who've taken time out of your life to join us. And so I encourage you now, before we leave, if you want to just type into the chat something that you are committing to do after you leave here. It could be a conversation, it could be something you're checking out, it could be a personal action, it could be a collective action. If you want to just share a little bit of that inspiration and passion with the group that's gathered before you go on to the rest of your evening, if you want to type into the chat a commitment that you're taking away from this conversation, how you plan on getting involved. That would be wonderful to see what's been sparked in this gathered community tonight. And a reminder that this is not the end of the conversation. On Saturday night, we will be continuing this conversation with a short film screening and then conversations with our local partners, Importa, Immigrant Hope, Immigrant Legal Defense Center, who will also have some opportunities for engagement. Oh, there we go. Landon's found the movie night. There's the information. Don't forget to RSVP so you can get the link through Eventbrite. We hope to see you there. And so much appreciation for all of the work, the hours and the heart that has been put into this work by the two of you most especially, and by all the people who are showing up here this evening. Thanks for being with us. And thank you to all of you who've made this possible through your financial support and your time and effort that you've put into our second Love Your Neighbor Week event. It's been a wonderful evening. Thank you. I'm going to chime in one more time as I'm reading some of these fantastic comments that I know we did not get to every single question that you had. So if we have questions and if you want to follow up, if you want to send us an email, we will do our best to share the information that was shared tonight and hopefully keep the conversation going.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for doing this. Julia and Landon and Frank, thank you.
And I keep thinking of more people to thank. Thanks to our translators who are helping with the accessibility.
I'm in. And I'm sorry for talking fast. Ooh, I'm halfway through I went, oh man, that's what you told me not to do.
It is a special skill to be able to keep up in these virtual settings. So thank you for your skill and your patience with us.
And I've been a translator, so I should really know better.
And thank you to Landon Rank for coordinating and doing a masterful job of keeping track of all of the pieces and creating this forum for us to come together. Thank you, Landon.
Thank you.